Our story
Hello.
begins with a knock at the door. Anakin didn't open it. He listened quietly, pondering over who it might be. He knew that Obi-Wan had a knocking style. The same went for Ahsoka and Mace Windu. But this was not Ahsoka. She was gone. Anakin tried to bring himself up by reminding himself that Ahsoka was not dead. But gone was still not present. After the first series of knocking, everything sat silently. Anakin tried to feel through the Force to see who it might be, but he couldn't feel clearly. The blinding sadness that he felt following Ahsoka's decision to leave the Jedi Order kept his senses disturbed. He had spoken to another Jedi, unrelated to the incident, just to regather his composure before his next deployment. Clearly it wasn't working yet. He would probably delve into the dark side just to get over it, but right now, he had something to face, if he had the interest in doing so. The individual was still outside his door, he could feel that much, but the answer to who remained. Another knock rang at the door, and Anakin called out, asking who it was. The individual answered, explaining that it was Master Plo Koon. He just wanted to speak. Every ounce of Skywalker wanted to tell Plo to leave him alone. He understood that Plo had decent intentions, but he did not change Ahsoka's fate. Whether or not he voted to remove her from the Order to face trial didn't matter. He was still a part of the Council. He was still a piece of the problem, and another reason for Anakin's current suffering. He, though, decided against his own wishes, and told Plo to come in. The door shot open, and a gentle Jedi Master, covered in his robes, walked in somberly. He first extended his own personal apologies to Anakin for everything that happened. Skywalker didn't say a word, and Plo understood, so he stood quietly, respecting his peer, explaining that he had an offer for him. Part of Anakin hoped that he might be able to become a Jedi Master. It's not that being a Master was something he needed to make up for what happened to Ahsoka, it was just a nice gesture to lessen the blow. Something that would restore his consistently falling trust in the High Council. Plo's tone didn't shift towards some sort of exciting promotion though. He was still warm, but there was an undertone of deceit. Perhaps it was paranoia because of his newfound distrust in the Council. Perhaps it was really there, but it changed how Anakin approached someone he thought he could trust. Plo tried to explain that the Council made its mistakes, and he was sure Master Kenobi had spoken to him about the decision to remove Ahsoka and so forth. Anakin shook his head. They hadn't, and he hadn't, forcing another wave of awkwardness to hit the room. Plo crossed his arms and told Anakin that the Jedi Council wanted to help him out, knowing how close he and Ahsoka were to one another. As Plo started to give out the details, Anakin interrupted him, asking if they were really suggesting a replacement. He got off his bed with his brows creasing in anger. Why did the Council force Ahsoka out of the Order if they planned on just throwing someone else onto him? Was it a cover-up for their failures as an organizational body? The Jedi Master sighed heavily. He knew this wouldn't go well. It's why the Council sent him, instead of Kit Fisto or Mace Windu. They thought that Plo would be able to lessen the blow, perhaps even more than Kenobi. Clearly, they thought wrong. No one would have been able to clearly convey this message without Anakin feeling like they wanted him to just forget Ahsoka. Those were the exact words the Jedi Knight said. He wasn't just going to forget his former apprentice. He loved her like a sister. She was someone he protected, trained, and befriended. Just replacing that soul with another wouldn't just be wrong, but unethical. Plo tried to help Anakin by telling him that Ahsoka wouldn't want him to suffer in silence. Anakin cut back, explaining that it wasn't her choice to leave the Order. Had they trusted her, as Anakin did, then she wouldn't have considered abandoning the Jedi. Anakin then scoffed. If it weren't for the war, he would have considered doing the same thing at this very moment. They clearly weren't as ethical as he once thought the Jedi as an Order were. Plo nodded his head, pulling a data pad out of his belt and putting it down on the table next to him. He explained that this individual might not be someone he wanted to train, but they needed someone to teach them. Plo explained that perhaps a student and a teacher in need of a master and an apprentice could thrive off of having someone like each other in their lives. The Jedi Master exited, and once the door closed, Anakin launched a box off the shelf. It bounced a couple of times before shattering and dispersing everything out of it. Fury ripped across his chest, and he forced his face into a pillow before unleashing a scream of frustration. The Jedi pissed him off so much. He immediately turned down towards this mess and started working on it. In the coming few hours, after he spoke with Padme, ate some food, and cooled down a little bit, he looked at the datapad left behind by Plo Koon. Was it interest in the prospect or mere curiosity? He didn't know. Anakin looked at the words written across the device and looked through the report. A Jawa Jedi. Go figure. Anakin now got the gist. The council saw a Jedi and a Tatooine-born native and thought it'd be funny to pair them up together. He sighed and flipped through the documents for the Jawa named Kuro. Like most students that grew up during the Clone War, Kuro showed tendencies to use the dark side throughout his training. Youngling instructors were putting in a request with the High Council to remove Kuro from the Order. Anakin looked at the date of request and knew that this student only had 4 more days left as a Jedi. He could fix his habits up, but there was a very slim chance of actually being forgiven inside the Order. Kuro had gone too far, too many times, which was enough for the instructors to request removal. Anakin felt bad for the youngling. He was considerably older than most of his peers, a 15-year-old youngling that no one selected. In all fairness, even Peel had expressed interest in training Kuro prior to his death. Anakin sat the datapad down next to him, on his bed, and thought about the decision. It wasn't betrayal to Ahsoka, and he needed to stop visualizing it as that. She had chosen her path in life. He had his. He sighed and promised himself that he would consult Padme and Rex about this. Firstly, he needed to get Padme's outside perspective, and then also see if Captain Rex and the men of the 501st would be understanding and accepting of a new Jedi commander after their previous one was forced out of the Republic. The following conversations would be everything that Anakin needed before making the decision to go forward with this pathway. The first discussion was very encouraging. Padme knew how attached Anakin was to Ahsoka, and how much losing her would affect him. She suggested that a new student would be a good way for him to heal some of his own wounds, while making a positive difference for someone else. Though Padme was very cautious about Anakin potentially damaging someone else because of his own hurt. If he didn't believe he was emotionally or mentally capable of it, then he shouldn't even be on the battlefront, let alone training a student while fighting on it. Rex's input was also very helpful. The clones really didn't have a say in who got to be their Jedi leader or not. There wouldn't be hard feelings if Kuro replaced Ahsoka, but it should be known that the clones wouldn't ever forget Commander Tano. She was their commander. She had fought alongside them. That loyalty was earned, so anyone could be their commander, and they could respect them, but true loyalty was something else. Maybe Kuro could earn it from them, but his abilities as a Jedi and as a leader would need to be tested, especially with the 501st. That was perhaps Anakin's final concern. He didn't want to just think about death, but it needed to be considered. Jawas were already easy targets because of their small height, let alone a Jedi that apparently struggled with his instruction. Again, think of Even Peel, a smaller Jedi killed earlier in this war. The 501st wasn't going to be going into missions that got any easier. That meant that this Jedi Padawan could die. Anakin didn't want to lose anyone else, and if he got attached to another Jedi, then how would he fare if they died on him too? That was hard to grapple with in theory, let alone in reality. He had a major decision to make, and truthfully another restraint keeping him from Kuro was the High Council. He didn't want to go through them to get himself a new student. He would rather just select a student on his own, without the eyes and ears of the Council monitoring him in that given moment. When Kuro became Anakin's student, it was done with a quiet conversation between the youngling's primary instructor and Skywalker. He watched the student in class, and truthfully, Kuro reminded him a lot of himself. He wasn't a bad student per se, rather misunderstood. He was someone that had a lot of angst, rightly so. Kuro's family had been slaughtered by a raiding party of Tusken raiders. He was the last survivor, and only found by Ki-Adi-Mundi's apprentice, Asharad-Het, by mistake. Just a bunch of locals from Tatooine. Regardless, Kuro joined Anakin in his first deployment following the temple bombing. They weren't returning to Cato Neimoidia, because that assault fell flat once Skywalker and Tano were removed from the investigation. Shame too, they could have probably been midway through the campaign by the time the 501st redeployed. Kuro was extremely grateful for the opportunity, but he was quiet. He spoke some Galactic Common due to being a Jedi, but he mostly communicated through basic sign language. Skywalker was a little worried about this, but simply told his apprentice to stick by his side. Similar to his initial approach to Ahsoka, he was very hard on Kuro. Anakin knew that this war would test his student in ways the Jedi never had before. During their first battle though, Kuro excelled. He watched, he obeyed, and simply listened. This was partially a loyalty thing, but also very much so a trauma thing. Every time Kuro had an idea as a youngling, he'd be shut down. Anakin didn't have that same approach to instruction, and he encouraged free thinking from his student. It was hard, especially in the first few engagements, but slowly it stuck. It was good too, because Kuro could get an understanding of how the 501st worked and use his imaginative mind to help. Jedi up front with Rex and some other high-ranking clones took the charge. It was encouraged to think for oneself. Though, because of his stance at this point in the war, frustration with the Council and overall desire to end the conflict with the most efficient method, Anakin encouraged Kuro to use the dark side. This was something that he didn't openly say. The habits that Kuro had been dissuaded from using inside the temple were utilized openly because Anakin did. Skywalker without Ahsoka didn't feel bad for encouraging the use of the dark side. This wasn't because he had something against Kuro. Rather, he knew that Ahsoka for the most part didn't like using it. Anakin respected that, so he never encouraged her to do so. But Kuro was much like him. He had the fire from the twin suns burning in his heart. He suffered loss at an early age, and knew how it felt to be wronged by the Order. That, though, led to the accidental discovery of something else entirely. During the 5th battle Anakin and Kuro spent together, Anakin gave his new apprentice a special mission. Due to their fight transpiring inside the tight corridors of a massive base in the Mid-Rim, he asked Kuro to use the vents to sneak around and take out the super tactical droid. The battle was a constant back and forth. The Republic was winning, but Anakin wanted to save the lives of his troopers. This mission would give Kuro experience, but also, hopefully, win them the battle more effectively. When the Jedi Apprentice reached the command center for the droid operation on the system, he used the dark side. Naturally too. He weaved his lightsaber before using his hands to crush the first wave of attacking battle droids. In his defense, he launched blaster bolts back at the few other droids before being filled with pure darkness. Rage rippled through his bones and he focused specifically on the tactical droid. A few other battle droids fired at him, but he slipped by them, by flipping through the air and landing on the head of the tactical droid. With a twist of his hands, Kuro felt into the head of the machine and redirected its controls to do what he wanted it to do. An order rang out inside the command bridge. The droids were told to fire against each other, and they did almost immediately. They dropped, dead, and Kuro leapt off of his project, cutting through the next few droids that still stood. The young Jedi turned back towards the super tactical droid and waved his hand. Kuro gave it another order, to turn the rest of the droid army inside this facility against itself. The officer machine turned around and tapped on the command console and listed off the exact words spoken by Kuro. All Separatist battle droids inside the facility were taken over by Republic engineers. All droids needed to be shut down for being a threat to the Separatist alliance. Kuro launched his lightsaber into the back of the droid, and down below, inside the rest of the base, a civil war unfolded between every single battle droid, a true free-for-all. The clones, still taking cover, listened as blaster fire continued, just not directed at them. Anakin weaved his saber and then realized no one was attacking them. He and Rex shot each other a look as the next several minutes were filled with droids destroying one another. The clones were obviously cautious. As they started making their way towards the position Kuro was supposed to be at, clones took out still functional but already downed machines. Then they saw the Jedi Padawan. His glowing eyes caught their attention, and Anakin asked if he was alright. The Padawan nodded his head with joy, before telling his master that he used the Force. He was happy to see that it actually worked. Skywalker gave Rex a signal, basically the command to go ahead and continue scouting out the facility. Kuro tried to explain that it wasn't worth their time, but they had to anyways. The next few minutes would be Anakin learning something from his own apprentice? There was a name for the power used by Kuro, but he didn't know what it was. What Kuro had been utilizing inside the Jedi Temple with medical droids and even astromechs was also an ancient power used by the Sith. The power of Mechu Duro was dark side based, and it helped its user understand the mechanical systems of any droid. A super tactical droid was harder for Kuro to break into, but by using the dark side as much as he did with Skywalker over the previous engagements, it became easier. He and Skywalker spoke extensively about what he did to use that power, and Kuro explained that he had known how to do it throughout his life. The Jedi Master that brought him into the temple explained that one of his family members had a journal that accounted for that power. The fragments of the hologram didn't last until Kuro was old enough to hear it, but Mechu Duro had been a part of his life since he was born. Anakin thought it made sense. He was a Jawa after all. They decided to work on this Force power together later. Until then, they would clean up their little mess and prepare for the next battle. This, in both of their minds, was the definitive moment when their relationship as master and apprentice became solidified. It wasn't that they didn't respect each other until this moment. It wasn't even that they disliked each other. It was just finally something for the two of them to bond over. Every master and apprentice needed that. Ahsoka and Anakin were so similar personality-wise, whereas Kuro didn't know who he was. He certainly wasn't as vibrant and lively as Ahsoka. He was a quiet, to himself, sign language speaking Jedi warrior that came up to the average person's shin. They were simply two different people, but even opposites can come together. While it wasn't permitted typically to take home trophies, Anakin and Kuro took the super tactical droid away from the facility so they could study it. Of course, the two Jedi didn't want to use this power on their astromechs or any other droids inside the Republic fleet. Experimenting on an old super tactical droid helped Anakin get an idea of what his student had done, while also giving the two of them a chance to perfect what they were doing. They had a massive war on their hands and lots of ground to cover, especially with battle droids. This line of training resulted in new strategies. Anakin, clearly with his new addition to his personal life, wanted to separate ties from the High Council, but his student had one major difference from his master aside from personalities. Even as a quiet student, Kuro was well liked by his peers. He was a little bit of a class clown. He played the stupid card, even though he wasn't stupid, to get laughs in his classes. Everyone knew sign language because of him, so why not use it to his advantage? And who didn't love a little guy that could squeeze where no one else could during class? So while Anakin refrained from telling these secrets about his student to his master or the council, Kuro started crafting a lesson plan for mastering this Force power and sending it to his friends that also became Padawans before he did. Skywalker wanted to also see if this type of power could work against General Grievous. He may have not been all clanker, but he was close enough. Most of his brain was controlled by the cybernetics Dooku and Sidious put into him. Of course, super tactical droids were the main targets for most battles. Winning was the main focus, but there was a lot of scheming that went into how they would approach battle from here on out. Most of the Jedi that started training with Mechu Duro were also able to use it on droid captains, but Kuro was the secret weapon of the 501st. Most Jedi could only do so much reconnaissance. Most Jedi couldn't fit into ventilation shafts because they weren't fun-sized. Kuro had no problem moving around droid formations. Point being, pretty much all the Jedi that used Mechu Duro were capable of using it. Their problem came from not being able to get to CIS leadership. Yet one thing that benefited the Republic warriors was that the Sith had no clue this was happening. Same with General Grievous. Mostly knights, padawans, and young masters were using these powers. Some of them tried to explain it to the elders, but it was shut down immediately. The Jedi, traditionally, were stuck in their ways. The CIS was losing battles it shouldn't have lost. The Sith had no idea, and a collection of Jedi youth were comfortably using the dark side of the Force against the will of their masters. All of this positively changed during the Battle of Ringo Vinda. Despite the high performance from Republic leadership, especially Jedi commanders, the battle for Ringo Vinda was still prioritized, and remained a joint assault between two Jedi groups. Similarly, Clone Trooper Tuff would have a mental break during the battle, leading to the death of Jedi Master Tiplar. It would be a shock to everyone during the assault, directly leading to a full-blown Jedi retreat. The Republic had been defeated, and it wasn't safe to continue fighting. Kuro had to fall back from his attack on Admiral Trench, an assault that would have actually resulted in a quick Republic victory despite their stagnation. Though the order from General Skywalker to retreat shed light on a very important conspiracy. Tipli, Anakin, and Kuro watched a deranged Top speak to himself in what seemed to be tongues. He had a lot to say about being a good soldier and following orders. The three of the Jedi tried to understand, while clone medic Kix tried to snap his brother out of psychosis. Kuro, though, in his youthful ignorance, reached out through the Force, attempting to mind trick the clone, curious to see if perhaps Dooku was here and they didn't sense him, and Dooku was using the Force, or maybe another assassin not named Ventress. Kuro may have surged with his power of Metu Daru, but mind tricks were definitely not his forte. By reaching out to break the clone free of whatever spell this was, he sensed something mechanic. This wasn't an actual servo or a motherboard, but a biochip. Something within the clone's mind that forced him to act this way. Kuro dove in deeper, trying to help Top out of it, someone that he considered a close friend. In this, Kuro discovered that whatever the biochip was broken. He got physically closer to Top before the trooper lunged at him, and Kuro fell backwards, leaving the clone's mind in the same go. He stayed quiet about this experience. When Top was taken to Kamino, he explained everything to Anakin, leading the Master and Apprentice duo to begin to investigate the quote-unquote biochip. While the Tup incident wouldn't provide any answers and ARC Trooper 5s would still be killed by Commander Fox, there would be more questions that Kira wanted answered. The biggest red flag, especially to Anakin, was the inoculation that the Supreme Chancellor claimed the clones got. He now had to choose to either trust Kuro or Palpatine, something he really didn't want to do. Yet it was the most damning case against Palpatine. Kuro promised his master that there was something inside of Tops's head, and hypothesized that there were other clones with similar devices. Truthfully, Kuro didn't believe this was a widespread issue or that every clone had one. He did want to test volunteers inside the 501st to see if he was right though. Anakin encouraged this, and he let Kuro take the lead on this mission. Through weeks of studying, thanks to help from Rex, Kix, Jesse, and a few other men inside the 501st, an answer came to the Jedi. There were inhibitor chips inside of the clones. However, Kuro, and therefore Anakin, didn't believe that these chips were inherently negative. What Nalase said about the chips being used to regulate behavior seemed accurate. Neither of the Jedi had any reason to distrust their clones, and instead, they kept the information between themselves, and the small coalition of other younger Jedi that they were close with, specifically Kuro. This group of Jedi, all of which using iterations of Metu Daru, had a collective distrust for the High Council. It started with the shock of Ahsoka's departure, many of them internalizing that as a betrayal against them, that the Council could turn on any one of them at any given moment. Then it was followed up with Anakin's continuous success, his decision, in their eyes his decision, to train Kuro, and of course the rapid spread of the teachings of Metu Daru. There were elders that tried to tear down the usage of it, but it gave results, which in the eyes of the young knights, nothing else did. The rising tension inside the ranks of the Order was the rebellious youth versus the elders, who had surrendered prosperity for conflict. Didn't matter if it was right or not, it's how they perceived it. Using the dark side for results wasn't a problem because they, the youth, were winning battles that their masters and the counselors were losing. Inevitably, this brought the war to General Grievous's doorstep, with a blindside attack from the Republic, under the leadership of Skywalker and Kuro. The fight over New Cove on the Corellian Run was a brutal slugfest between two major fleets. The 501st caught wind of Grievous's location, thanks to one of the many tactical droids they reconfigured with Force. Grievous wasn't ready for a fight either. This was a staging ground. With the war entering its final months, Grievous was hard-pressed to find victories, because the Republic was constantly winning. This was both a case of the Jedi dominating with Mecha Daru and Sidious's plans. Though it should be noted that Palpatine was slowly becoming hyper-aware of the success youthful Jedi were having on the battlefront. He didn't know why. It was becoming problematic, especially since major droid armies were crumbling to smaller Republic forces. The Jedi didn't go out of their way to boast about their success, or why they were doing so well. All anyone needed to know was if they won, or if they rarely lost. The clashing fleets over New Cove had a very flustered General Grievous calling in various reinforcements. Admiral Yularen was already ready for this battle, and prepared defense lines for the incoming Separatist fleets. Like Master Yoda, Kuro had himself a modified Eta II class starfighter, and flew behind his master on the assault. The attack on Grievous's flagship was a blitz of interceptors, fighters, and gunships behind. Thanks to strikes from wings of ARC 170s, the gunships were able to speed through the flak to make their landing procedure. Skywalker was the first to land. He ripped out his saber and led the charge with ARC Trooper Jesse behind him. He trusted his apprentice by now to carry his own weight once he arrived. Plus, it'd be more helpful to open up the corridors so they could both approach Grievous together. Skywalker and the men of the 501st poured down the corridors, blasting through battle droids and slicing through them. Grievous was already on top of the counterattack by sending Magna Guards to intercept Skywalker and his troops. But as the droid general noticed, the other Jedi, the Jawa, entered on his own. Grievous cackled at the idea of killing another Padawan in front of their master, just like Nadar Veb in front of Fisto. With Anakin countering and swinging through the Magna Guards and Jesse and Rex moving towards the bridge, Grievous surprised Kuro inside the hangar bay. The apprentice ignited his saber to block an attack of 4 weapons. In his block, he was launched from his feet across the bay. Kuro slammed into the ground and rolled under a starship. A few clones in the bay attacked Grievous, firing their blasters. He shredded them as Kuro tried to get himself back to his feet, only to get parried again. Troopers reported in the duel in the bay to Skywalker, who turned on a heel and rushed through the ship. He hadn't encountered Grievous on his own, but damn it if his apprentices did. When he arrived, Kuro was on his last leg, blocking a strike from Grievous and flipping over him. Just as he cleared the droid general, the claw of the vicious cyborg shanked him in the back. 4 indents were made as he tumbled across the hangar bay. Skywalker reached out, pulling apart the metal surrounding Grievous's ribs. The droid general fell to his knees, coughing heavily. Anakin ignited his lightsaber before realizing that there were alternative methods to fighting. He raised his hand forward and looked to his apprentice, who started to roll around. Kuro was okay. Probably an injury, but okay. Anakin focused on Grievous's head, and the general moved at his Jedi opponent. Kuro used the Force on Grievous too. In one short burst of connection, Skywalker and Kuro understood what the other was thinking, and forced that train of thought onto Grievous. Most of his cybernetics weren't in control over his consciousness, but they did control his body. He stopped short and fell to his knees, heaving unnaturally. The new order was given, the direction established, and it wouldn't be removed until completion. The clones inside the flagship were pulled away. It was time to return to their own vessel. The 501st knew the protocol by this point. Not only were they highly successful in battle, but when utilizing Mecha Daru, they used it better than anyone else in the galaxy. Luckily for the clones, they were able to escape the flagship before it jumped into hyperspace. On Sereno, Tyrannus was in contact with Sidious. The two of them were discussing a new strategy to rush Order 66. Rumors had reached them about the Jedi effort to control droid armies, and how effective it was. They were pushing Order 66 up because the Jedi might win the war before the public could turn against them. Palpatine tried his best to keep the people at odds with the Order, but it was going awry because of the youth movement that focused on Mecha Daru. Dooku believed that they needed to push Order 66 out and tell the galaxy that the Jedi were taking control over the droid armies to test their powers. It was all a build-up for their great betrayal, a move to turn the droid armies and the clone armies against the Confederacy and the Republic. Sidious tweaked that, changing everything to just the droid armies, because people to a degree like the clones, and they couldn't have the clones being seen as enemies if they were meant to be heroes of the Jedi Purge. Dooku understood before his call went silent. Sidious tried to contact his apprentice a few more times before reports came in from Sereno about a separatist starship smashing into the castle, killing both Dooku and Grievous. As they planned though, a new contingency was created to turn the clone armies against the Jedi. It would be a little rushed, but the war was already nearing its third year. He could afford to shave a few months off of his original plans. Sidious had already realized that the use of Mecha Daru was pushing Anakin closer towards darkness anyways, so he believed it would only be beneficial to continue this path. Not to mention, if he didn't survive, then Palpatine knew Anakin wasn't worth having as an apprentice. The Order shot out into Republic lines, across the galaxy, on Coruscant, in the Outer Rim, everywhere. Clones marched on the Jedi Temple to an unsuspecting group of monks. Some counselors were present, but with 2 whole divisions attacking, the defense would only last for so long. However, there was a slight trick that saved several Jedi from death in this purge. Thanks to the study done on Tup earlier in the war by Kuro and Anakin, the younger, more youthful Jedi of the active war knew that the clones had biochips. Individuals with quick reaction times were able to exploit the inhibitor chips by commanding the clones to work around them. Similar to a rock surrounded by a stream, those who managed to use Mecha Daru on the commanding trooper's biochips survived Order 66. Anakin and Kira were among the survivors of the Purge. The temple, though, for the most part, was not that case. There were a few others who managed to save themselves, but it was a total horde of clones. Nearly 15,000 men entered the temple and surrounded it. The survivors of that purge grouped up and found protection in the underworld, waiting for someone else to save them. Those of the High Council, either on or off-world, prepared their own counter, but to whom? They didn't know. No one by this point had associated the attack with Sidious. The elders that didn't participate in the dark side power had no clue the orders came from the executive office, so they went into hiding, using old Jedi hyperspace routes to hidden worlds so they could protect and keep their young safe. The youth, on the other hand, collectively knew the truth. Palpatine was behind the attack. It was clear because he had been on the other side of the executive order. Sidious was unbelievably prideful about Order 66. Instead of hiding himself under a hood, he projected himself as the Supreme Chancellor. He wanted the clones to all see his face, and he wanted any Jedi who happened to catch a glimpse of him to know who ordered their deaths. Despite what he knew about Mecha Daru, Palpatine didn't know that it could work on clone biochips. No Sith ever needed to use it on a biochip, not to mention it was a complete accident that it was ever discovered to work on them. Sidious had no reason to assume that the Jedi could manipulate themselves out of the Purge. With the Elders disappearing into the cosmos to regroup and try and diagnose the true threat to the galaxy, the youth were gathering up with Master Skywalker. A select group of Jedi were getting ready for battle with the Chancellor. Anakin, instead of being hurt by this revelation, was filled with anger. He didn't believe that Palpatine could be capable of such evil, but in seeing his friend issue out the order to kill himself and his friends, he believed that Palpatine needed to die. The group gathered for the assault on the Chancellor was about 40 strong, mostly because they assumed Palpatine would be protecting himself with several elite squads of clones. Anakin had his reservations about this attack. He simply didn't want to believe that Palpatine was evil, but his friends had died, and Kira was heartbroken over some of his youngling peers having been reported as killed or missing. The group of 40 prepared inside of a Venator. Thanks to their own use of Mecha Daru, they were able to put the clones into a dormant mode, similar to how they were without Order 66. It was a simple override of the command. The Jedi didn't know it, but they were using Order 150 to completely turn off the inhibitor chips. But that's why the clones didn't attack them. Once they arrived over Coruscant, they deployed towards the executive building. 3 LA-AT gunships touched down, and out walked the Jedi. Unlike what they anticipated, a dozen or so Senate commandos guarded the docks, but no clones. The commandos raised their weapons, and the Jedi used the Force to launch them away. Anakin, typically known for leading the assault, went in last. Kuro instead took the lead, as the Jedi Jawa. They rushed through the main chamber and into the executive office, to a surprised Darth Sidious. He couldn't believe so many Jedi survived, but they were all so young. So he ripped out his lightsaber, knowing all too well that he would enjoy this slaughter. By the time Anakin rushed in through the entrance, the Jedi were fighting for their lives. They were batting Palpatine's 2 lightsabers away from themselves. Skywalker prepared to rush in, but it hit him like a blur. Palpatine, his lifelong friend, crushed his lightsaber through bodies of Jedi. They were flung from the floors into walls or cut in half. Palpatine was a monster. Even Anakin's own apprentice was slammed down through a chair. Skywalker rushed in, stabbing his saber at Palpatine, who deflected, spinning around and colliding with another Jedi. With the Force, he pulled one of the Jedi into his saber and piked another. It was a vicious kill that left some of the other knights in pure shock. Palpatine electrocuted another duo before Anakin swung his saber through one of Palpatine's, before blocking another counter and losing his footing. Even though Palpatine was easily the dominant force here, he was surrounded constantly. He'd killed 10 of them, but they kept coming. All of his strikes were useless when he lost his second saber thanks to Anakin. He would receive a cut through the chin, through the ear, across the shoulder. He continued to attack though, using his pain for darkness. That, though, didn't result in immediate deaths from all the Jedi. They were injured or wounded, but after the first 10, never totally killed. Skywalker blasted Palpatine again. He stumbled, using the Force to drag another Jedi in front of Anakin. Instead of stabbing his friend, Anakin deignited the weapon, spinning around the Jedi and reigniting it. Palpatine palmed the saber with the Force, using it to keep himself safe, just as Kuro slipped his weapon through Palpatine's knee. The Sith Lord tried to kick back, but he dropped, just in time for a Twi'lek Jedi to rip her saber across Palpatine's ribs. Anakin used this moment to shove his weapon through Palpatine's chest, sending him backwards to an awkward echoing bone break. The Sith Lord died in that moment, and the Jedi under Kuro's command rushed from the chamber. Anakin stood silently for a moment, watching the corpse, wondering where he went wrong. Anakin trusted Palpatine with his whole heart, and this is who he really was. Eventually, Anakin would catch up with the rest of the Jedi and escape. They would not return to the Venator. Instead, they would begin their own hunt for the rest of the survivors. Following Palpatine's and Dooku's deaths, the war would continue for several more months. Just big armies clobbering away at each other, with no real end goal in sight. There were motivations from the governments, but the populations couldn't care less. The Jedi had their own problems, and thus were removed from the war. It especially didn't help that Order 66 absolutely ruined them. But their main problem was a continuation from the Ahsoka case, or the temple bombing. There was a youth movement that the elders couldn't compete with, and it led to a schism that separated the Order. It luckily was non-violent, but it forced the surviving branches of the Jedi sect into 2 different directions. One was Skywalker and the rest of the youth towards a new world to build a new legacy, while the elders went elsewhere, towards Tython, to recapture what it meant to be a Jedi. The only one of the elders that Anakin maintained contact with would be Obi-Wan, but everyone else was pretty much dead to him. Luckily, Anakin didn't have to worry about nightmares when Luke and Leia were born. Thanks to the powers he used, like Mecha Jeru, he was able to be with Padme throughout the entire process. However, Anakin had to admit to himself, he still cared about the Jedi, and went out of his way to continue serving with them. He never did this despite his new family though. Yet his student, Kuro, remained an important focus of Skywalker's. He wanted the student to finish his training and reach his full potential. With the youth sect, that was very much so already in his future. The years that continued following after the Clone War would see plenty of change. The Jedi never reunited into one full sect. Eventually, because so many young Jedi ended up with the youth, the Elder sect would fall apart and die out on Tython. Those aligned with Kiro and Skywalker would build a new future for themselves. It would be a true Jedi Order. They'd be instrumental in ending the Clone Wars by using Metru Durum against the likes of the droid armies. It resulted in peace that would be enjoyed by the Republic for decades to come. Anakin, Kiro, and Ahsoka developed a bond in the following years. It was sweet to reunite with his former student, and even more enjoyable to watch Kiro grow into the Jedi he was destined to become. While the galaxy struggled after the conflict, and the Jedi were pretty much non-existent in the public eye, they would remain that way politically, just not personally. While the older order faded out, the youthful sect, the true Jedi, would remain as silent guardians in the galaxy, knights of the people. Like Skywalker and secrecy on Coruscant, the rest of the new order would help where people needed them most. They contribute across the entire galaxy, and while people wouldn't know them as Jedi, they would always know that someone was out there watching and protecting. And that, my friends, I think that's a wholesome story. Special thanks to all the patrons for supporting the channel. Smash the like button. Let's talk about this story. This one is a little nuts. It does really heavily rely on Metru Durum, but, it's kind of the story for Metru Durum. You got the Jawa, you got Anakin with the mechanical backstory, and so, it was fun to have, this kind of power that, one, it would be something for Anakin to relate to another student with. I know one of my earlier videos back in the day, a little while back, the Train a New Padawan, that was more of an emotional one where they built a dynamic based off of emotions and kind of rejection, whereas this specific relationship is kind of built off of mutual skill. I think Anakin in the story respects Kiro and sees a lot of himself in Kiro, and that's kind of what I wanted Anakin to see. I think a big part of his reason for taking Kiro under his wing is because he kind of just is trying to heal his own inner child in some way, and it's semi-selfish and it's kind of meant to be portrayed as such, is that Anakin's trying to heal an inner child for himself, and he kind of does by, training Kiro all the way. As for the war and all that, I think that if you could command a super tactical droid to issue out commands, kind of like when that one droid targeted the ship that Ventress was in, when Dooku betrayed her, I think you'd have a war that would go by pretty quickly. I don't necessarily think the Sith would catch on to it, and so that's why I kind of had the Sith trying to play catch up, and why Palpatine is so willing to rush Order 66 at the end of the story. For the biochips, that was kind of a 50-50 move, so I kind of get it if you weren't a fan of that. The biochips, I was like, it's mechanical enough, and there's not really an instance of someone using a biochip with Metru Durum, but I figured since it is a biochip, it could technically be influenced. It's kind of like a gray line there, kind of like as they're evolving, because it is a dark side power, as they're evolving with the dark side over the war and the wars, pushing them further down that path. It kind of seems natural for them to expand that power a little bit more in such a time of desperation, and that's why I think it could theoretically work, because it would be such a desperate measure with Top first, and then of course Order 66 later. So I hope you all enjoyed the story. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.